I should have known the alerts meant nothing. I always do. You learn after a while that the government loves its drills, loves screaming at you through a cracked intercom as if you're a child. Stay calm. Follow protocol. Report unusual activity. You file reports, check boxes, and keep moving. The city hums with bureaucracy, and most days it's all static noise you learn to ignore. That morning, no, it was late afternoon, though the sun hadn't fully dipped, I sat in the briefing room on the 7th floor of the Capitol Annex, elbow propped against a stack of reports, tapping a pen against the desk. The hum of the HVAC system filled the silence, the lights above me flickering faintly with a low buzz, as if reluctant to stay on. I stared at the numbers on the page, but barely registered them. My eyes glazed over the phrasing. Incident escalation matrix pending. Another waste of time. I underlined things I didn't care about. Across the room, Marissa, the senior aide 2 cubicles over, leaned back with her eyes half closed, scrolling through her phone without bothering to shield the screen. A half-eaten sandwich sat on her desk next to a travel mug spewing steam, the scent of bitter coffee sharp in the recycled air. She yawned loudly, glanced at the window, and then at the intercom where a blinking red light flickered like an impatient eye. "Emergency alert test," someone muttered in the hallway. Yeah, Marissa replied without looking up. I smirked, the muscle in my jaw twitching with practiced disdain. Emergency alert test, what a joke. The government loved its overreactions, its rehearsed drills. I'd been here long enough to memorize the cadence of the broadcasts. They screamed through static every quarter, warning us of terrorism threats or flu outbreaks that never came. I glanced at the monitor on the desk beside me. The feed showed the city's map in gray blocks. No anomalies. No alerts besides the flashing test in progress bar. I exhaled, loosened my tie, and leaned back against the cheap padded chair. My lower back ached, knees stiff from hours at a desk. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the grit there from lack of sleep. Nights of long hours, brief naps at my desk, and caffeine. This was my existence. Cynicism had become armor. If you let the alarms get to you, you'd never survive the job. The intercom clicked alive, and the familiar mechanical voice came through in an oddly calm monotone. "This is an emergency alert test. Please remain at your stations. There is no cause for concern." No cause for concern. I almost laughed. Outside the window, the city spread in its usual grid. Roads crisscrossed like lines on a blueprint. Cars moved sluggishly, bumper to bumper. No helicopters. No flashing sirens. Just another overworked, overstressed afternoon. I pushed the paperwork aside and rested my chin in my palm. My eyes wandered to the skyline in the distance, a line of buildings jutting into the dull sky. Beyond that, clouds lay flat and uninspired. A crow flitted across the glass, a small shadow against the haze. I felt the urge to text Mark, the other aide who always jumped at alerts, but stopped myself. He'd panic, and I didn't need that noise. Besides, he'd tell someone else, and by the time word got around, half the building would be irrational. Better to keep quiet, better to focus. I reached for my coffee, and that's when the first odd thing happened. The lights above me flickered again, not like before where the hum wavered for a second. This time they dimmed, paused, and surged back brighter, as if someone had pinched the power lines. I glanced at the window. For a moment, the skyline seemed to warp, like heat waves rising off asphalt, but steadied instantly. I shook my head. Probably a surge. Probably nothing. But it stuck with me. My eyes wouldn't leave the horizon. Just as I let out a breath, the monitor beside me hissed with static, the test in progress bar replaced by black noise and sharp bursts of white. My thumb hovered over the power button. Then a second voice intruded through the speaker, low and grainy beneath the test announcement. I froze. "Stay indoors," it whispered. Faint. Slurred. I glanced around. Marissa's phone screen was dark. The other aides pretended not to hear. The HVAC buzzed louder, filling the gap. I reached for the monitor, but before I touched it, the static cleared for a second, and a second message played. More urgent this time, but still broken. "Do not look up, lights avoid." My hand went cold. I sat up straight. It could have been interference. Maybe a hacker messing with the test feed. But my skin crawled, and the back of my neck burned. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the window again. Nothing. The horizon remained a flat line of familiar towers and antennae. But then the sky itself seemed different. Hard to explain. The color wasn't quite right. Gray, but with a depth like ash suspended in the air. A smear of something unnatural stretched across the horizon for a fraction of a second, then gone. I leaned forward, gripping the desk. "Marissa," I whispered. She barely blinked. "What? Did you hear that?" She shook her head, eyes still glued to her phone. "Static, probably. These systems are old." I should have believed her, but I didn't. After I whispered to Marissa, I knew she hadn't heard me. The room carried the low hum of recycled air and the soft clicking of keyboards, indifferent to the sudden static that had crawled into my headphones. Still, I sat frozen, staring out at the skyline like it would confess something to me if I just kept looking. That's when I saw it. It started as a glow, not a city light, not a reflection from a rooftop, something deeper. A smear of pale blue-white near the horizon, just above the tallest government buildings, where the antennas jutted like skeletal fingers. At first, it was a barely perceptible shimmer, like heat haze or distortion from glare. But then the edges pulsed, widening and contracting rhythmically like a heartbeat. I squinted, unsure if my eyes were tricking me. The pulsing grew sharper, each beat a soft, almost inaudible thrum that seemed to vibrate through the glass itself. The glow brightened, then dimmed, not flickering alive. I stood, my chair scraping across the floor like an offense. My mouth went dry. "What the hell is that?" I whispered. Marissa didn't look up. I pressed my hand to the window pane. The glass felt warmer than it should have, sticky almost. My breath fogged the surface in pale swirls. The glow surged once more. I swear it stretched tendrils outward, reaching toward the buildings like fingers probing the skyline. My eyes darted between the pulsing form and the reflection of myself in the window, pale and slack-jawed. I could feel my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. The intercom burst alive again, but this time it didn't feel mechanical. The words came jagged through layers of static. "This is not test." A pause. "Stay indoors." The sound warped, broken syllables stretched unnaturally. My stomach knotted. A second voice layered beneath it, raspy, whispering just at the edge of comprehension. "Lights don't look." Static flooded the line again. I hit the volume button. Nothing. I grabbed the monitor, tapped the screen, and it spasmed violently, pixels blooming into blinding snow before snapping back to gray. The map grid dissolved momentarily, and for the briefest moment, I saw shapes, not roads, not buildings, something organic, twisting. Then the screen went dark. Marissa finally noticed. "What's going on?" she snapped, narrowing her eyes at me. "Are you messing with it?" I think there's something." Before I could finish, the overhead lights flickered again, this time dimming to a sickly yellow and almost going out before snapping back on. The air in the room seemed to thicken. The smell of ozone crept in, sharp and acrid like lightning before a storm. Marissa frowned, placing her phone face down. "Okay, that's weird." Another technician across the room muttered. "Probably a power surge." But the glow outside didn't behave like any surge I'd ever seen. It rippled. Like liquid metal, the edges bent and flowed, stretching impossibly long tendrils before snapping back toward the core. I caught one glimpse of something inside the light, something like veins pulsing alive. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and it was gone. The skyline was back to normal, dark towers, scattered antennas, dull clouds. I sucked in a breath so hard my chest hurt. "Did you see that?" I whispered to myself. Then the monitor crackled one last time. A line of text scrolled across the screen in jagged, broken letters, half of them unreadable. "Do not look up." I froze again. My fingertips went numb. For a second, the world outside held its breath. And then the silence cracked. A low moaning vibration rippled through the building. It wasn't a sound exactly. It was pressure against the eardrum, a deep pulse that crawled from floorboards to skull. People in the room paused mid-motion, eyes glazed, staring at nothing. Marissa's lips parted, but no sound came. The humming grew louder. I turned toward the window again. The glow had expanded. Now it wasn't just a blur near the horizon. It stretched upward, slicing the sky in jagged, vein-like streaks of blue-white. The edges curled inward, as if the sky itself were folding. For a moment, I thought the clouds cracked open. Then, as if aware of being watched, the light recoiled. The pulsing dimmed, but not fully. It hung there, humming softly like an organism drawing breath. A second later, all the monitors in the room flickered once more. Static rose in waves, and one by one, the emergency broadcast channels cut out. The silence after was suffocating. I pressed my ear against the glass. For a moment, I could swear I heard something whispering. Not a voice. Not words exactly. More like fragments of language wrapped in static, syllables repeating but indecipherable, as if the air itself carried secrets that didn't belong to any known tongue. My scalp prickled. Goosebumps climbed my arms. Okay, I mumbled, backing away from the window. My fingers trembled. I glanced at Marissa. She stood frozen, eyes wide. Do you hear it? I asked. She shook her head slowly, eyes narrowing. What is that? I opened my mouth but couldn't answer. The sound rose again. A second layer of hum built beneath the first, deeper, darker, resonating in my bones. I swallowed. I should have told someone. I should have gotten help. But something, a part of me that knew fear too intimately, told me not to speak. Not to draw attention. Not to give it more reason to find me. I sat back down, but the chair felt unstable beneath me. My palms were clammy. My heart slammed against my ribs like it wanted to break free. I pulled out my phone. No signal. I checked the emergency alert app. Blank. I opened the browser. Nothing loaded. The internet had died. I stared at the dead screen, at the swirling reflection of my own pale face. And outside, beyond the glass, the lights pulsed once more, soft, steady, hypnotic. I didn't dare look up again. The lockdown announcement came without warning. The intercom crackled again, but this time it wasn't filtered or distorted. It barked through like a soldier delivering orders. All personnel, immediate shelter protocol engaged. Repeat, immediate shelter protocol engaged. Stay indoors. Avoid windows. Avoid lights. Communications are compromised. The words hit me like a fist. People leapt from desks, knocking over chairs and papers. Marissa's eyes snapped open wide enough to reveal the whites, and she shoved her phone in her pocket. What the hell is going on? She hissed. I don't know, I whispered, my own voice brittle. The lights overhead sputtered and dimmed again. For a second, the room plunged into near darkness. Someone cursed behind me. The humming vibration thickened, a low growl beneath the floors. The doors slid shut with heavy hydraulic locks. A red, secure light flared above the corridor entrance. It hit me then. We weren't being evacuated. We were being sealed in. I stood, heart racing. Marissa grabbed my sleeve. Come on. We need to move. I hesitated. Where? Anywhere but here. But the emergency orders repeated, flat and final. Stay indoors. Do not open doors or windows. Do not look up. It felt like they were talking directly to me. My name must have been whispered into the static earlier. It still rang in my head. The hallway outside was empty. I crept toward the door. The glass panel near the handle shimmered, then warped, like heat waves dancing on metal, before it steadied. I jerked my hand back. The smell of ozone thickened. Marissa hissed, "You're not going out there." "I just want to see." "No, don't you dare." Her grip was iron. I froze. My mouth went dry. Behind her, a man in the corner began hyperventilating, pressing his hands to his temples as if something screamed inside his skull. The emergency broadcast on the wall speaker repeated again. Only this time the static slurred the words like saliva on a microphone. "Do not look." I clamped my ears, but it seeped through my bones anyway. A wave of nausea rolled over me. I stumbled back to my desk, pulling my chair in front of the door like a barricade. My hands shook as I grabbed folders and stuffed them in drawers. "Just sit," Marissa hissed. "Stay away from the windows." I nodded, unable to trust myself. The room's fluorescent glow flickered irregularly now. Shadows crawled along the walls like ink stains spreading across paper. The air grew colder, but sweat broke out across my skin. I leaned against the desk, eyes darting toward the window. The skyline was almost gone, dim silhouettes dissolving into a dark smear. Only the faint pulsing glow remained on the horizon, like a distant heartbeat calling to something inside my chest. I shut my eyes, but when I opened them again, I thought I saw movement. A flash of something crossing the sky. Not a plane, not a satellite. A shape, angular with spiked edges, folding into itself before vanishing. I rubbed my eyes again and looked back. Nothing. A low growl reverberated through the walls. The monitor beside me remained dead. My phone screen sat face up on the desk, glowing briefly before shutting off entirely. I picked it up. No service. No Wi-Fi. Nothing. I slammed it down, more out of frustration than sense. The emergency orders repeated for the 5th time. Do not look up. Do not look up. Do not look up. This time the voice broke mid-sentence, like the speaker choked on its own words. I curled into the corner, knees drawn to my chest. Marissa sat beside me, fists clenched. Something's wrong, she whispered. This isn't a test. No, I breathed, it's not. The growling vibration grew louder again, rippling through the floor like a low tide pressing against shore. My ears popped. I bit my lip until it bled. I tried to steady my breathing, but it wouldn't obey. Every inhale scraped my throat raw. Every exhale trembled like a rag caught in a storm. The walls seemed to pulse in sync with the distant glow. Even the shadows moved unnaturally, creeping along the edges of the room like living ink. Marissa's eyes locked on me. Are you okay? She rasped. I wanted to lie. I wanted to pretend this was nothing, but I shook my head. I think it's watching, I whispered. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted. The red, secure light above the door flickered. The humming rose into a sharper note, and in the silence between pulses, I heard it clearly this time. A voice, not human, not machine, broken into fragments but distinct. Come. It stretched across my chest like icy fingers. I gripped the desk until my knuckles turned white. Marissa mouthed something, but no sound came. We sat there, frozen, while the pulsing lights outside continued their steady, hypnotic rhythm. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but the words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. I wasn't sure if I was scared of the craft, or of the silence waiting to consume me if I spoke. The lights dimmed again. It wasn't sudden like a flicker. It bled slowly, as if some unseen hand drained the brightness from the room. My eyes struggled to adjust, muscles clenching as shadows stretched longer and longer, creeping toward me across the floor. The hum, once distant, now vibrated at my skin's surface. I could feel it in the hairs on my arms, crawling under my collarbone, pressing against my jaw like fingertips that weren't there. I forced myself to breathe, slow and shallow, but each inhale dragged deeper into my chest until I felt hollow, as if lungs weren't breathing at all. Marissa clutched her knees, eyes glassy, lips barely moving. I shouldn't have come to work, she whispered. I swallowed. Me neither, I replied, though it felt like my voice belonged to someone else. I turned my gaze toward the window again, against every warning etched into my mind. The glow wasn't static anymore. It pulsed in waves, like ripples expanding outward in slow, deliberate beats. Each wave crawled across the sky, distorting the air around it. For a brief moment, the buildings seemed to bend toward the light, their edges softening, melting, as if gravity had forgotten its job. I rubbed my eyes again, hard, and still the image remained. Then the hallucinations began. A face appeared, not human but structured like one. Eyes without eyelids, black pits, glistening like wet stone. A mouth stretched too wide, filled with rows of pale, needle-like teeth. It hovered for a fraction of a second, just beyond the glow before folding into it. I jerked my head away. My heart hammered so hard I felt dizzy. I clutched the desk's edge to steady myself, but the wood felt slick. Don't look, I croaked to myself. But curiosity clawed at me. I looked again. This time the glow stretched down like a ladder, tendrils of light spiraling toward the streets below. Cars, trees, even pedestrians seemed to freeze under its pulse, trapped in place as if time had stalled. For a heartbeat, I saw someone, a man running, but his form elongated, limbs warped like melted wax. His mouth opened wide, but no sound came. I squeezed my eyes shut. The moment I did, the room flooded with flashes. Memories that weren't mine tore through me like shards of lightning. I was in another place entirely. Fields of purple grass swaying beneath a sky of green fire. Structures, impossible towers twisting like vines made of metal and bone. Eyes staring at me from the darkness. A sea of faces contorted in grief and rage, their mouths forming silent screams. I collapsed against the desk, breath shallow. Stop! I barked, but my voice cracked, drowned by the hum. The monitors behind me crackled awake again without power. Static snow bloomed across the screens, pulsing rhythmically. Then, images appeared between bursts of noise. Maps warped like flesh. The Capitol dome bent inward like the eye of a collapsing star. Faint lines of text scrolled sideways. Treaty 47A. Protocol Delta. Contact initiated, before dissolving into static. I staggered toward the screens, but my knees buckled. I dropped to the floor. My palms slipped on the cold tile. The air thickened around me, suffocating, as if invisible hands pressed my chest from all sides. I clawed at my throat, gasping. "Help me," I rasped. Marissa reached for me, but her eyes were unfocused, pupils dilated, as if she wasn't really seeing me at all. She whispered something, but the words warped. "Don't, it's watching." I grabbed her arm. "Stay with me," I barked, desperate. She flinched as if I were a ghost. Her hand slipped through mine. Her eyes fluttered shut. I screamed, but my throat rasped like a dry whisper. The growl surged again. This time it wasn't just vibration. It struck like sound waves hitting flesh, twisting nerve endings. I covered my ears, but it seeped through bone, marrow, even memory. A voice crawled into me. "Look." It wasn't a command, it was a lure. The glow outside sharpened. I could feel it pulling at me. I clawed at my desk like a drowning man, trying to grasp the edge of reality. My eyes twitched uncontrollably. The edges of the room blurred. The fluorescent lights stretched like elongated tubes before snapping back. Shadows thickened into shapes. One shape, half animal, half machine, hovered just at the corner of my vision before vanishing. I forced my eyes closed again. Darkness folded over me, but the images came faster now. A forest of pale, twisting limbs reaching out. A child standing in a beam of light, eyes hollow and endless. An endless sky filled with shards of glass reflecting alien constellations. I cried out, but no sound emerged. The room seemed to tilt. I collapsed sideways onto the floor, cheek pressed against the cold tile. My breath shuddered like a trapped animal's. Through closed eyelids, I saw light leaking in streaks. A voice whispered, sharper this time, "Come a look." My heart froze. I wanted to tear my eyes open, to see what waited beyond the window. But my body refused. I curled tighter, trembling. Marissa's figure blurred beside me. The glow outside pulsed again. The door remained shut. The building seemed to hold its breath. And I sat there, paralyzed by hallucinations I couldn't trust and fear I couldn't fight, as the night stretched on, thick with static and light that promised nothing but dread. I don't know when I stopped trembling. I must have drifted in and out of half-consciousness, curling against the desk while the growling waves ebbed and pulsed like a tide I couldn't escape. At some point, minutes, hours, I lost track. I sat up and realized the fluorescent lights had died altogether. The room was pitch black except for the glow bleeding in from the horizon, pale and steady, stretching like veins across the sky. "Marissa?" I whispered into the dark. No answer. Her desk sat empty. Her chair tilted backward, abandoned. A chill crawled over my skin. I rose, legs stiff, and groped toward the door. The handle was cold. I pressed my ear to it. Nothing but silence. I tried the knob. Locked. My stomach twisted. I crouched by the floor vent where the emergency supplies were stored and found the panel loose. With a trembling hand, I peeled it back and crawled through the narrow gap, scraping my forearms raw against the metal edges. It smelled like damp concrete, dust, and something older, something that hadn't been disturbed in years. The crawl space opened into a narrow maintenance corridor behind the basement wall. I paused, holding my breath, as the building creaked in the dark. My shoes crunched on gravel as I crept down the hallway. The emergency lights flickered weakly ahead. I kept to the shadows, avoiding open areas where the glow from outside could seep in. The hum from the sky pulsed stronger down here, the walls vibrating in time with the unseen rhythm. At the corridor's end, a steel door stood half buried in dust and cobwebs, its keypad dead but its handle loose. I forced it open. A blast of cold air rolled out, damp and heavy with mold. The stairwell spiraled downward into deeper darkness. I hesitated, but curiosity, desperation, or something darker forced me forward. Each step grated underfoot. The concrete walls were stained with age, water leaking in dark trails that smelled of iron and decay. The stairs spiraled into an underground chamber that smelled of stale air, metal, and something acrid. Ozone again, but thicker, more persistent. I reached the bottom and blinked. Dim monitors lined the walls like dead eyes. Screens sat cracked and coated in dust, their once blue grids warped into static blobs. Paper files were stacked in leaning towers, some eaten by moisture and age. The room's only light came from a single overhead fixture flickering like a dying firefly. I staggered forward, brushing against a metal table that clattered with broken equipment. The cold air clung to my clothes like wet cloth. I scanned the room. A single terminal flickered weakly in the corner. A small, handwritten placard above it read, "Authorized access only, archive level Delta." I hesitated before approaching it. The terminal, though dusty, hummed faintly, as if drawing its last breath. I wiped the grime from the screen. Static hissed, then cleared. A login prompt blinked. User, ________________________________________________________________________________________________________________ A password field waited, dark and expectant. Below the screen, someone had scribbled with a marker. "Do not trust." My pulse spiked. I scanned the walls. A file cabinet stood half open, papers spilling out like bones from a crypt. I pulled out the nearest folder. The top sheet crackled like dry parchment. Typed lines read, "Extraterrestrial Contact Initiative, Protocol Delta." I froze. My fingertips trembled against the paper. I flipped the sheet over. Long-term observation agreements with non-human intelligence groups. Security clearance level, top secret. The next sheet bore handwritten annotations in the margins, some names crossed out, some marked disavowed. Further down, technical diagrams sprawled across pages like organs mapped for dissection. A schematic showed a spacecraft unlike anything in known aerospace design. A biomechanical structure with flowing limbs, tendrils, and internal cavities radiating energy fields. Beneath it, a note. Observe. Interact only through controlled channels. Never direct exposure. My chest tightened. The hum from the sky pulsed again, deeper now, rolling through the floor like distant thunder. The air thickened. I clutched the file to my chest. A monitor flickered. Images burst across the screen, one after another. First, blurry satellite images. Then, radar overlays marked anomalous object inbound. Then, handwritten notes referencing fourth contact event. Another screen flashed coordinates I didn't recognize. One frame showed something that stopped me cold. A black, veined craft, limbs curling outward, hovering above what looked like the Capitol dome, except warped, stretched as if the city itself were being consumed. My mouth went dry. A second note scrolled in stark white text. Initiate evacuation only if entity makes visual contact with civilian population. The words seared themselves into my mind. So it wasn't speculation. It wasn't paranoia. It was protocol. The government knew. They'd written it down years ago. I staggered backward. A draft from the corridor stirred dust in the room like whispers rising from the floor. The smell of ozone thickened again, bitter, sharp, unnatural. The air clung to my lungs like lead. I pressed my back against the table. My fingers shook so violently I dropped the file. It landed face up. A final sheet spilled out. Last line of defense, comms termination. If entity interactions breach control, destroy transmission grid. I froze. The same phrase I'd half heard through static before. My throat tightened. The hum grew louder, rising into a piercing frequency that seemed to drill into the back of my head. The monitors flickered once more, and for an instant the screens went black before displaying a single blinking red line. Access override detected. I slammed the file shut and shoved it back into the cabinet. But the moment I turned, I saw them. Shadow shapes pressed against the thick glass of the stairwell door. Not human, not fully formed. Dark outlines, elongated limbs, something flickering beneath skin like veins of light. They hovered for a fraction of a second before melting away. I stumbled back, heart racing. The monitor's static hissed again, louder. The room vibrated, and I knew the underground archive wasn't a place for hiding. It was a tomb waiting to be opened. The air down here was suffocating. I sat against the cold metal table, the file cabinet half open beside me, papers spilling like forgotten warnings. The monitors flickered weakly as if their last breath could be snuffed out at any second. Dust danced in the stale air, stirred by drafts leaking through cracks in the walls. The smell of mold metal and ozone clung to me like a skin I couldn't peel off. I held the folder like a lifeline. Extraterrestrial Contact Initiative. Protocol Delta. Do not trust. I read those words again and again, as if repetition could anchor me. The government hadn't just known, it had planned for this. Prepared for contact, for catastrophe, for something worse. Prepared to lie. Prepared to cut the lines. Prepared to seal the doors while the city burned. I should have thrown it away. But my fingers traced the diagrams as if they held the answers I craved. A part of me, obsessed, reckless, wanted to dig deeper, to uncover everything. I pulled out another folder. Inside were transcripts, marked restricted access. The top page began mid-sentence, as if someone had ripped the first pages away. Yes, the anomalies intensified after the deep scan last quarter. We have reason to believe the entity responds to electromagnetic stimuli. Evacuation plans are for containment, not safety. The words blurred in my vision. A wave of nausea rose. I pressed my palm against my mouth to stop myself from vomiting. Below the transcripts were photographs, grainy, partially redacted, but unmistakable. A massive form floating above rural land. Tentacle-like appendages, each pulsing with light. Ground fissures radiating outward like fractures from impact. The label on the side read, Observation Event, Region 47. A note scribbled beside it, Field Teams Non-Recoverable. I staggered back. I could still hear the growling hum from above, low and insistent, like something breathing through the floor. My eyes darted toward the stairwell door. For a moment, I thought I saw faces pressed against the glass, hollow eyes, stretched mouths. I slammed my fist against the metal. Nothing. Just vibration. My heart pounded so loudly it felt like it would tear through my ribs. I sat back down, staring at the flickering screens. One of them finally stabilized, revealing a still image that made my breath catch. A signed document, stamped with government seals, dated years ago. Long-term cooperation agreement, Non-Human Intelligence Group 47A. The signatures were blacked out, but the heading clear as daylight. This was no accident. The government had bargained with them. Hidden from the public, hidden from lawmakers, hidden from everyone except a few. And now it was happening. The glowing craft outside wasn't a fluke. It was the result of experiments, of signals sent into the void, beckoning forces we didn't understand. I slumped forward, face nearly touching the cold table. The room's temperature dropped suddenly, sharp and merciless. A draft of ice-cold air swept through the chamber, raising goosebumps along my neck and spine. I grabbed the folder again, flipping pages until my eyes locked on a final note. If the entity manifests visually, protocols advise communications shut down to prevent uncontrolled exposure. All personnel briefed only at highest clearance. Public response, quarantine drills, and misinformation. A cold shiver ripped through me. So the drills, the false warnings, they were lies. The government hadn't been shielding us, they'd been keeping us blind. Preparing for containment while civilians watched the sky in terror. A deep bitterness surged in my chest. I clenched my jaw until my teeth ground painfully against one another. The growling vibration rose again. It pressed harder into the concrete. The monitors burst into static, then cleared briefly once more. A scrolling line of text appeared. Access terminated. Comms grid compromised. Protocol Omega recommended. Omega. The final protocol. Comms termination. I slammed the folder shut. The draft in the stairwell deepened. The air pulsed with unseen menace. I wasn't safe. None of this was by chance. My fists curled into white-knuckled grips. I whispered, "You knew." My lips trembled. I should have known. I thought of the panic outside, the screams I'd half heard before crawling here. I thought of Marissa, gone silent. I thought of the warnings buried in static, and I felt something colder than fear bloom in my chest. Anger, resentment, a desperate urge to tear the whole system down, to scream the truth to every soul trapped in this nightmare. But there was nowhere to scream. The hallway behind me stretched into shadow. The stairwell door remained shut tight. The monitors flickered. The hum rose again. The craft outside pulsed like a living heart, calling, beckoning. And I sat in that tomb of secrets, trembling between revelation and madness, knowing that the truth would not save me. but it might damn me anyway. I didn't notice it at first. It began as a faint warmth seeping through the floor vents, like the breath of something just outside the walls. Then the draft thickened. It wasn't air, it was pressure, pulsing in waves that rolled through the room like tidal force. The flickering light above me dimmed again, this time slower, deliberate, as if the bulb itself was drowning in shadow. My muscles ached. A dull heaviness pooled in my joints. My fingers, pale and brittle, twitched against the folder on the table. I sat upright, but it felt as if gravity had loosened its grip. My back pressed against the metal table, and the cold seeped into my spine. I clenched my teeth to stop the tremors in my jaw. The hum rose again, no longer a distant vibration, but something that crawled into my bones. It started low, deep like distant thunder rolling underwater. Then it sharpened, a frequency that whispered directly to my skin. My heartbeat slowed against its rhythm, trying and failing to catch up. The air thickened until every breath dragged at my lungs like pulling wet fabric. I leaned forward, fingertips digging into the table's edge. My knuckles turned white. My eyes felt too large for their sockets, stretched, unblinking. Then the memories came. Not memories I owned. They didn't arrive in neat flashes. They slammed into me like shards of broken glass. A voice murmured somewhere inside my head. We opened the gate. Another voice, distant but urgent, spoke in a language I didn't understand but somehow felt, coiling in spirals, curling through nerves. My eyes fluttered closed for a second, and the room shifted. I was no longer in the bunker. I stood on a platform floating over endless dark water, the surface rippling with violet light. Above me, a sky pulsed green, warped by strange constellations spiraling outward like living galaxies. The water rose in waves that didn't crash. They floated, bending like ribbons, coiling toward me. A structure loomed beyond the horizon, a ribbed frame of bone or metal, or both, curving into the sky like a beast's spine. Its limbs twisted like roots, each one tipped with a glowing eye that pulsed in rhythm with the hum around me. I stumbled backward, but the room wasn't gone. I opened my eyes again. The bunker's ceiling stretched, cracking like glass. The metal walls rippled in waves, as if liquid metal were trying to breathe. My hands went numb. I rubbed them, but sensation returned distorted, burning, tingling, like thousands of needles stabbing under the skin at once. The pulsing glow from the vents thickened, pale white veins crawling across the floor like some living organism reaching for me. I pressed both hands to my temples. Stop, stop. My mouth formed the words, but my voice barely emerged. The hum surged again. Time slowed. The second hand of my watch dragged across the face like syrup pouring from a jar. My breathing stretched and fractured. I could feel each breath caught in my throat, rasping against bone like a trapped animal. And then louder. A voice overlapping. They are not ours. Contain at all costs. We must merge, we must. The phrases collided, looping, scrambling like radio chatter in reverse. Images surged. A woman with no face weeping into her hands. A child made entirely of light, reaching toward me with hands that melted like wax. A hallway filled with eyes. A figure standing at the end of the corridor. Familiar, but its mouth stretched unnaturally wide, as if swallowing the air. I screamed, but the sound hit my ears distorted. The walls leaned inward. The monitors flared. Static bloomed across them like frost creeping across glass. I fell backward, slamming into the table. The file spilled open. Sheets slid across the metal surface like paper boats adrift in a sea of light. My chest heaved. I curled around myself, knees drawn tight, arms locked across my ribs like armor. The glow from the vents wrapped around me like tendrils, cool, slick, humming. It didn't touch skin, but it burrowed deeper, wrapping nerves and thought alike. Images from my childhood flashed, out of order. The smell of rain on hot asphalt. The soft curl of my mother's hand through my hair. The face of my father, smiling, or was he screaming? Then the images twisted. Their mouths opened wide and split like chasms of darkness. My vision tunneled. I could feel time stretching and snapping like broken wire. 1 second lasted forever, then vanished. The hum became louder, until it wasn't a sound but a pressure wave pushing against my skull. I clutched the table edge until my fingernails dug into the metal. I whispered through cracked lips, "Stay, stay." But even as I spoke, I knew I wasn't alone. The bunker's corners shimmered. Something unseen watched me. I squeezed my eyes shut. Inside the darkness, tendrils of light pulsed like veins around my thoughts. They whispered promises I couldn't decipher. They lured me deeper into madness. And I sat there, trapped between present, past, and something not human at all. I don't know how long I sat there. Time lost its shape after the lights began their slow invasion. My breathing grew jagged, like I was trying to catch air that kept slipping past my teeth. The bunker's walls shimmered in and out of focus, as if they weren't made of metal but flesh, soft, pulsing, stretching with each wave of light. Every surface seemed to quiver with intent. I tried to steady myself by gripping the folder, but my fingers barely obeyed. They twitched and jerked like broken marionettes. I could feel the pulse crawling up my arms, into my shoulders, into my skull. The veins at my temples throbbed in sync with it. My mouth went dry. I stuck out my tongue, but it felt swollen foreign. The overhead light flickered in slow bursts, like a dying heartbeat. The silence between pulses grew heavier. I whispered, "It's nothing, just nerves, just stress." The words came out in bursts, breathy and uneven. I repeated them, louder, as if force could drown out the pressure. But the bunker didn't answer. Instead, something inside my head answered. "You already belong." The words formed without sound. They came straight into my thoughts, bypassing my ears, sliding into memory like a serpent curling its way through bone. I froze. My eyes darted to the vents. The pale light crawling from them twisted like ribbons, weaving shapes in the air. For a moment, I swear I saw faces layered inside it, hundreds of them, stretching toward me with open mouths, but they never fully formed. My skin crawled. Goosebumps rose across my arms like scales. I shivered violently, but the cold air didn't ease. The room warped again. The concrete floor bent upward, curling toward the ceiling as if gravity had reversed. The file on the table stretched and twisted like molten wax before snapping back into shape. I blinked hard. Everything went still. For a heartbeat, it felt safe. Then the walls began to breathe. They pulsed in slow waves, expand, contract, like lungs drawing in and out. The monitors crackled. Lines of static hissed across the screens. A distorted voice whispered, overlapping with another. "Stay indoors. Look away. They are here." I slammed my fists against the desk. "Stop it!" I barked, but my voice wavered. I rose to my feet. My knees buckled, and I gripped the edge of the table for support. The pulse crawled up my neck. My heartbeat staggered, skipping beats in erratic bursts. My eyes watered. The overhead light flared, and for a second I saw everything in painful clarity. The room stretched out like a long corridor, walls lined with faces. Some of them were mine. Older versions. Younger versions. Faces distorted with fear, rage, despair. I stumbled back into the corner. My breath came in short bursts. I pressed my palms against the cool concrete. For a brief second, the cold grounded me. Then the air thickened again. The light from the vent wrapped around my wrist. It crawled across my skin like an insect, slow but deliberate. I jerked my hand back. The sensation remained. It wasn't just on my skin, it burrowed deeper. The memories shifted. I felt my mother's touch, soft fingers brushing my hair. I felt laughter echoing from a distant room. But those images twisted. Her eyes stretched too wide. Her mouth warped into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The laughter cracked into shrieks. I shook my head violently. My hands shook as I pulled a scrap of paper from the desk. I grabbed a pen, but my fingers slipped. The ink smeared before I could write. I scribbled anyway. There in my head. The letters jagged, uneven. I scratched out lines, wrote over them. I shouldn't look. They know me. I'm all ready. The pen fell from my hand. I pressed my palms to my ears as if I could block the sound. But it crawled through bone, muscle, thought. My eyes fluttered closed again. The images intensified. The corridor lengthened. My desk dissolved into pale light. I stood in a hallway where the walls pulsed with veins of glowing green and blue, like something alive, breathing in rhythm with me. At the far end stood a figure. It had my face, but hollowed out. The eyes stretched wide, mouth split open. It beckoned with a hand made of tendrils of light. I couldn't move. I screamed, but the sound died in my throat. The figure whispered, "Come." I clutched the floor. "Stay," I begged it. The corridor tilted. The floor slid like water beneath me. The walls bent inward. My vision shattered into shards. I stumbled blindly back into the room. The desk, the monitor, the file, they reappeared. But the air hummed louder than ever. I dropped the paper with my frantic notes. I crumpled to the floor, rocking back and forth. I whispered confessions, half-formed sentences sliding into each other. I can't, it's everywhere, it's watching. I don't know if I'm me. The glow from the vent stretched across the room like veins of light, each pulse twisting into shapes, some animal, some human, some neither. The room itself seemed to lean closer, inhaling. I shivered violently, eyes wide, trapped between terror and some strange, hypnotic pull. I curled tighter into myself. The last thing I remember before darkness swallowed me was the feeling that the bunker, the air, the light, and I, all of it, were one living thing. And it was listening. I woke with a jolt, muscles stiff and knotted like iron cables. The air in the bunker still thrummed with that unnatural pulse. It seeped through the walls, the vents, even my skin, and I could feel it watching from the corners where darkness pooled thick as tar. My hands shook. The pen I had dropped earlier lay crumpled on the floor. Beside it, the half-scribbled page curled like a wounded animal. I picked it up, smearing the jagged words with the edge of my thumb. I'm all ready. The rest dissolved into ink-blurred streaks. I didn't care. I stood abruptly. The monitors had gone dark. A single, steady glow pulsed from the vent above me. The bunker felt suffocating now, not cold, not damp, but heavy, as if the very walls were pressing inward. I forced myself toward the equipment console in the corner. The wires spilled from it like tangled roots, coated with dust and corrosion. I knelt before the array, hands hovering over switches and fuses like a surgeon pausing before cutting into flesh. My heart thudded erratically. I clenched my jaw. Do it. The thought pulsed in my mind like the hum in the walls. Another voice answered. If you cut it, you die. I froze. My eyes darted toward the stairwell door. No one stood there, but I could feel eyes, 1,000 unseen gazes pressed against me from the darkness. I shut my eyes tightly. Better dead than. I started, but the words tangled. Better dead than what? Dragged inside? Consumed? Used? The thought made my stomach knot. My hands shook harder. I forced them steady. One by one, I traced the wires, mapping them with trembling fingers. The labels, corroded, half-eaten by rust, still legible. Grid 1. Channel B. Override. I memorized their layout. My mind whirled with calculations, some real, some hallucinated. The logic danced, blurred by fear. Still my hands obeyed. I reached for the fuse box. The metal plate was cold, clammy with moisture. I hesitated. A thought crawled up my spine. You'll be watched. I pulled my hand back, staring at the switches as if they were teeth ready to bite. The urge to flee clawed at my chest. But another part of me, dark, stubborn, whispered, if you don't, they win. I gritted my teeth. Stop. I growled it at myself. Stop being afraid. I pictured Marissa's desk. Empty. Her face ghosted through my mind. The screaming outside. The blank eyes staring from shadows. No one could save me. No one was coming. Only me. I forced my hand to steady. I unscrewed the cover. Dust fell in choking clouds. The metallic scent of corrosion filled my nostrils. The switchboard lay before me like a puzzle designed to ensnare the unwary. I traced the main power feed with my finger. Grid 1. I could destroy it here. Take out the entire communications network. Sever the signal feeding the craft. The thought thrilled and terrified me at once. I pictured the world outside spiraling into darkness. Emergency alerts going silent. Control towers dead. Everything cut off. I licked dry lips. Do it, I whispered. But another voice, softer, almost pleading, responded. You'll never see the sun again. I froze again. The vent's pulse thickened. It pressed harder into my nerves. My vision narrowed. I could hear whispers, indistinct syllables curling like smoke. The words made no sense, but the intent was clear. They wanted me to stop, or surrender. I slammed my fist against the metal frame. The hollow clang ricocheted through the room. I gasped. Enough. My hands, now steadier, moved with deliberate precision. I pulled the main power line. The contacts crackled like sparks leaping through dry grass. A faint blue flash flared. I yanked the fuse out. The entire console darkened. The vent's pulse weakened for a brief second. I almost sobbed in relief. But then the hum returned, stronger. It seemed to seep through the walls now, as if the air itself carried it. I cursed. Damn it! I gritted my teeth. I reached for another switch, channel B. The label flaked under my fingertips. I twisted it. The circuit broke with a sharp pop. The monitors blinked once before plunging into dead silence. Only the vent light remained, thinner now, as if struggling against the severed lines. I stared at it, sweat running down my face in icy rivulets. The silence felt deeper, more oppressive. I was alone with it, with myself. My mind spiraled. The voices returned. They'll come for you. You can't hide. Let go. I staggered back. My knees buckled. I crashed against the wall. My breath hitched. I pressed my hands to my temples, rocking, trying to drown the sound. But the pulse wrapped around me, persistent. Still, I had cut something. A thrill of defiance lit my gut like fire. I slumped onto the floor, panting. I whispered, "I'll stop it." My lips trembled. "Even if it kills me." For the first time in hours, a small fragment of clarity pierced the fog. I curled into myself. The bunker's walls seemed to hum in agreement or rage. The light from the vent flickered weakly. For now, I had bought time. But I knew it wasn't over. The craft would come. The pulse would return stronger. And soon. I thought cutting the feeds would silence it. For a moment it did. The vent light dimmed, and the bunker's suffocating hum slackened. But that reprieve lasted only seconds. The pulse returned. Stronger. More insistent. The walls began to throb like living muscle. The concrete trembled under my fingertips. The single vent above me flared to life with pale, viscous light that seemed less like illumination and more like something breathing, something waiting. The pulse crawled through the floor vents and into the cracks along the walls. It seeped beneath the doorframe. It pressed against my skin with cold fingers that didn't touch but insinuated themselves into bone and nerve alike. I staggered back, my breath caught in my chest. The air itself seemed thicker, denser, warmer, alive. I felt it coil around me like a vine of silk and steel. The smell shifted. Gone was the musty scent of mold and rust. Now it was sharp, metallic, alien. It burned my nose with something both sweet and rancid. The monitors remained dead, but I no longer cared. There was no need for screens. The light itself crawled over me. The walls pulsed visibly, veins of pale green racing beneath the surface like blood. The bunkers seemed stretched and shuddered. I could hear something else, faint at first but undeniable. A low-frequency ripple that vibrated against my teeth. My skin prickled. The hairs on my neck stood like wire bristles. My arms twitched uncontrollably. I rubbed my forearms. The sensation wouldn't leave. It burrowed deeper, crawling toward my chest. I could feel it beneath my ribs. Something reaching, something watching. I pressed my back against the wall and closed my eyes, but shutting them didn't help. Behind the lids, color bled into darkness. I saw flashes of movement, long limbs, eyes like suns, shapes twisting in impossible angles. I opened them again. The bunker's walls seemed to breathe faster. The vent's glow spread across the ceiling like roots pushing outward. I gagged, my mouth filled with bitter foam. I coughed hard, scraping my throat. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. It wasn't regular anymore. It raced, paused, stumbled, then surged again. I clutched my chest. My fingers trembled. My skin crawled as if thousands of unseen insects skittered beneath it. I tried to steady my breathing, but every inhale burned. I forced myself to look straight ahead. The corridor beyond the room stretched unnaturally long. The metal frame sagged like liquid, warping as if struggling to hold itself together. For a brief second, it opened. Beyond the warped corridor, I glimpsed something vast. A presence that filled the space like a second sky. A ribbed, metallic curve looming in the distance, lined with lights that blinked in impossible rhythms. The glow was white-hot. It didn't beam outward, it pulsed inward, drawing the darkness toward it like a drain. I stumbled toward it. My legs buckled. I gripped the wall. The texture of metal felt wrong. It rippled under my fingers like skin. The pulse intensified until it seemed to vibrate inside my skull. I screamed. The sound came out ragged, breathless. It hit the bunker's walls and vanished before echoing back. I clapped my hands over my ears. But the sound didn't stop. It came from inside me, from inside my bones. It was louder than thunder, louder than my own heartbeat. It was everywhere. I sagged against the wall, knees giving out. The floor rose to meet me like a wave. I fell hard. Pain flared across my shoulder and hip. I lay sprawled, gasping. The pulse crawled across the floor like veins of ice, reaching toward me. I kicked instinctively, trying to escape it, but it didn't retreat. It wrapped tighter. The air thickened into something almost tangible. I could feel it pressing against my chest. My breathing became erratic. My lungs fought to pull air that wasn't there. I clawed at my throat, desperate. A new sensation rippled along my spine, something like static electricity but colder, deeper. It arched into my scalp, into my neck, into my jaw. I froze. My eyes bulged. I could feel it creeping into my mouth, into my ears, into my thoughts. It whispered, "Come, let go. We will carry you." The words overlapped with my own memories. Marissa's laugh, my mother's hand, the smell of rain, but twisted, broken. The line between hallucination and reality snapped. I tore my hands from my ears and howled. No. The sound broke apart into a strangled rasp. The bunker's walls pulsed in rhythm with my scream. The light spread across them like wildfire. I stumbled to my feet. My eyes flicked across the cracked floor. The veins of light stretched toward me like fingers ready to drag me in. I turned toward the door. The corridor elongated, twisting into a maze. I staggered down the hall, gasping for breath. The farther I went, the stranger it became. The walls bent and looped around each other. The air thickened into something viscous, sticky. The light crawled along the seams like roots seeking prey. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I dragged them forward, muscles screaming. The pulse pressed harder. The smell thickened. The unseen presence roared in silence. I flung myself forward into the next room. For a fleeting instant, the doorframe warped into the shape of an open maw. I screamed again, but this time the sound vanished entirely. Only the pulse remained. Only the crawling light. Only the creeping dread. The craft had arrived, and there was no escaping it. The light swallowed everything. It wasn't something outside the room anymore. It wasn't creeping through vents or pooling at corners. It had already entered me. It wasn't cold or hot. It was everywhere at once. It crawled beneath my skin like living fire, curling along my veins, sliding through the muscle with an intimacy that made me recoil, yet I couldn't pull away. My fingertips spasmed. My arms jerked as if some unseen puppeteer tugged on tendons. I clawed at my chest, but it was useless. The pressure deepened. It burrowed into my lungs, wrapping itself around each breath, thick and suffocating. My chest convulsed. I gasped, but the air clawed at me like teeth. I fell to my knees, coughing, eyes watering, throat raw. The pulse had become a roar inside my head. 1,000 voices whispered through bone. Each one carried echoes, familiar, distant, twisted. Come home. You belong. Let us fill the cracks. I shut my eyes and the world didn't go dark. Instead, it exploded. I was no longer in the bunker. I stood in a field of ash. The sky above churned with writhing clouds that glowed from within like molten metal. In the distance, shapes moved through smoke, towering forms that bent at unnatural angles, limbs folding over themselves like waves breaking in slow motion. Their skin shimmered with alien scales, each one pulsing with light, breathing as though alive. I could hear their thoughts, or was it their breathing? Each pulse of light carried a word, a fragment of memory that slammed into me. My mother laughing, my father's tired eyes, Marissa's soft voice calling my name. But they distorted, stretching like rubber bands pulled too far. Her laugh became a howl. His eyes split and multiplied, staring at me from every direction. The voice calling my name thickened into unintelligible syllables. I clutched my head. The images merged with the roar until I couldn't tell which memories were mine. I screamed, but it echoed with the chorus of other screams. The tendrils pressed deeper. Something slick slid over my face, tracing along my jaw, wrapping into my ears. I felt the alien hands weaving into the soft folds of my mind. They stroked memories, rearranged them, smothered them with flashes of other lives. A child I didn't know crying in fear. A faceless figure reaching toward me. A city burning in green fire. The more I fought, the tighter the grip became. The room stretched again. The walls curved inward. The ceiling seemed to pulse like a heart. The smell thickened, metallic, sour, like rusted blood and ozone. My skin broke out in goosebumps. Each hair follicle screamed with static. My eyes bulged and rolled as vision spiraled through them. The corridor ahead twisted like liquid metal pouring from a broken pipe. I crawled toward the center of the room, desperate to ground myself. But the more I moved, the more the tendrils wrapped around me. I clawed at them, but they slipped away like wet silk. The pulse forced itself inside my mouth. I tasted copper. I gagged. I spat, but nothing came out. I tried to breathe. Air burned. My chest cramped. The pulse crawled deeper. It reached into my stomach. My bones felt hollow. My muscles spasmed uncontrollably. I could no longer distinguish which part of me twitched from fear and which from the alien invasion. The bunker's lights flickered. For an instant, the vent above stretched open. Pale tendrils streamed downward like roots seeking purchase. They curled around my shoulders, my neck, the curve of my cheek. I could feel their cold touch slipping beneath the skin into muscle. I collapsed onto the floor, hands pressed against my head. "Stop! Stop!" I rasped. But the tendrils laughed in silence. They whispered through bone. "We are your dreams. We are the spaces between thoughts. We are what waits beneath." The words pressed against me like fog thick with static. I squeezed my eyes shut again. But visions didn't retreat. They intensified. I saw my mother's face melt into another's. I felt the warmth of my father's hand on my shoulder dissolve into icy fingers. I saw Marissa's eyes, empty, soulless, pulling me towards something deep and dark. I clawed at the floor. The concrete cracked beneath my nails. Dust puffed up like breath. I dug until my fingers tore at cold, damp stone. But the pulse dragged at me, wrapping tighter. I screamed. The sound fractured into echoes of other screams. I heard myself calling names, not my own. I heard laughter bubbling from hollow mouths. The air thickened until I could barely breathe. My sight blurred. The edges of the room melted like wax. Colors smeared. Shapes stretched and bent. I staggered to my feet. The walls shuddered. The ceiling sagged as though it would collapse. The pulse surged once more. The tendrils surged higher, like vines racing up a tree trunk. They pressed against my temples. I dropped to my knees again. The world tilted. I felt myself dissolving. For a moment, the bunker, the walls, the file, the vents, all of it became nothing but skin stretched over bone. I was skin. I was bone. I was air. I screamed again. But the sound never escaped. It stayed trapped within my mind, looping endlessly. The tendrils pulsed faster. They raced across my chest, across my arms, into my throat, into my eyes. The last thing I remember before the edges of my world tore apart was the feeling that I wasn't fighting them anymore, that I wanted to surrender, that somewhere deep inside, part of me already had. I don't know what pulled me to my feet. The floor beneath me shuddered like water, sliding in slow, viscous waves that folded into themselves. I tried to move, but the air thickened with every step. My lungs screamed with each breath as though I were inhaling molten glass. The walls of the bunker stretched. They curved outward, bending like metal softened by fire. The seams that once ran clean along the corners now writhed like veins exposed beneath translucent skin. The hallway ahead warped. Door frames bent inward, twisting like ropes of steel pulled taut. The dull, rhythmic pulse from the vent battered against my skull, a relentless hammer driving at my thoughts. I stumbled forward. The corridor bent again, forming loops that spiraled back toward me. I spun in place, confused, desperate to find the exit. But every turn led deeper into distortion. The floor slid beneath my feet like ice sheets breaking apart. I clutched the wall for balance. The surface rippled under my fingertips. It was cold, wet, alive. I recoiled, but it flexed, stretching like muscle under skin. The pulse throbbed stronger, radiating outward through the walls into every nerve ending. My heart beat wildly. The rhythm broke. It raced, stumbled, surged, like a terrified animal bolting from unseen prey. I panted. My vision tunneled. The edges of the corridor bent like molten wax flowing toward the center. The fluorescent tubes overhead flickered, dimmed, then flared again. Each pulse distorted the space. Shapes bent. Shadows stretched unnaturally. The corridor's length expanded and contracted as if breathing. I blinked. The hallway twisted into spirals. Doors warped like open mouths screaming in silence. My hands shook. I rubbed my temples. For a brief second, I glimpsed the far wall. It shimmered, folded over itself. The exit twisted into a hollow oval, as if the air itself was being sucked inward. I forced myself forward. Each step was heavier. My muscles screamed with fatigue. My knees buckled, but I forced them straight. My throat burned. I gagged on the metallic taste filling my mouth. The pulse crawled across my chest. I could feel invisible fingers tracing the ridges of muscle, curling toward the center like roots seeking purchase. I staggered toward the warped doorframe. The farther I walked, the more alien it became. The concrete beneath my feet seemed porous, pulsing with life. Dust fell from the ceiling like ash. The walls writhed, flexing as if inhaling me. I clutched at the warped surface, trying to push open the door, but it yielded like thick flesh. It didn't swing outward. It melted. The frame stretched and twisted, curling inward like a mouth pulling itself closed. I screamed, but the sound caught in my throat. No air rushed out. The pulse intensified until it filled the room like an invisible tide. I kicked at the warped doorframe. The impact reverberated through the space, but it didn't break. It bent, folding like rubber around me. I scrambled backward. The hallway seemed to close in, narrowing. My vision blurred. The edges of objects pulsed with light. Shapes bent and melted into grotesque forms. A shadow at the far end stretched into a long, crawling figure. Its limbs bent backward at unnatural angles. It lunged toward me. I froze. My breath caught. The pulse pressed harder. The shadow twisted, dissolving into the wall like smoke drawn into fire. I ran. My legs shook, but I didn't stop. The hallway stretched behind me like a tunnel of writhing metal. The light smeared across the walls like liquid veins. The pulse slammed into my chest with every step. My lungs burned. My throat clawed for air. The corridor looped again. Doors bent sideways. The ceiling stretched until it sagged low enough to scrape my hair. I dove toward the end of the hall. The warped frame pulsed with pale green veins racing toward me. For a second, it opened. Beyond it, the world exploded into blinding white light. I plunged through. The hallway vanished. I crashed into something solid, dirt or glass or both. I rolled. The bunker's metal walls dissolved into open space. I lay sprawled on cracked pavement streaked with dust and ash. The night air hit me like a tidal wave, cool, dry, sharp with ozone. For a moment, I thought I'd escaped. I clawed at the ground. The smell hit first. A metallic tang thick in the air. Rotten earth. Burned plastic. Something alien. I rolled to my side, gasping. The sky stretched above me. It wasn't the sky I knew. It warped like melted glass. Colors bled into one another. Stars pulsed in unnatural patterns, spiraling in strange orbits. A massive form hung above the horizon. Its curves stretched like the shell of some cosmic beast. Tendrils reached downward, writhing like roots hunting for prey. They shimmered with pale light, each tip glowing like an eye ready to pierce the night. I staggered to my feet. The ground beneath me buckled like a sheet of rubber. My knees threatened to give way, but adrenaline kept me moving. I turned to run. The streets stretched like endless corridors warped by pressure. The lampposts bent and twisted like skeletons reaching skyward. The air thickened again, crawling into my skin. The pulse wasn't gone. It chased me. It crawled along the cracked asphalt like veins of living metal. I stumbled forward, breath ragged. My vision pulsed with afterimages of the corridor, of faces melting into shadows, of tendrils curling into my chest. My name, my real name, slipped from my mind like water draining from a sink. For a moment, I forgot who I was. I ran. The tendrils reached closer. The ground buckled again. The craft hung above me, closer than ever before. I ran into the night. The streets were empty. At first, that's all I registered. Empty roads stretched out beneath the warped sky, abandoned like a city drained of its soul. But it wasn't silence that struck me. It was the wrong kind of silence. The kind that feels like something's holding its breath. Streetlights flickered, their bulbs warped like swollen eyes, pulsing in slow intervals that matched the rhythm in my skull. Their pale beams stretched and bent across asphalt cracked like old scars. I stumbled forward. Broken glass glittered like frost along sidewalks. Shards of mirrors and screens lay scattered, half buried in dust. The wind carried a metallic tang, sharp and bitter. It clawed at my nose and throat, thick like acid, making me gag. I swallowed air anyway, desperate. My chest tightened. Each breath felt like drawing through wire mesh. I coughed, hacking violently, but the air clung to my lungs. I staggered on. The streets twisted ahead of me. Buildings hunched, leaning toward the road like gaunt watchers. Windows stared out at me, their panes cracked, some splintered into jagged smiles. Some buildings sagged sideways as if melting under unseen heat. Others arched forward, faces warped by pressure. Their bricks seemed to bulge, ribs beneath plaster skin. Some windows held shadows that didn't move, but they felt aware. I froze. For a second, I thought I saw movement. A blur. A silhouette in the corner of a storefront window. I whipped my head toward it. Nothing. The glass stared back, cracked like spiderweb veins. I forced myself onward. The hum in the air thickened. It pressed against my temples like hands. I felt its weight in my bones. My heartbeat thudded erratically. The asphalt buckled beneath my feet. Dust puffed up at each step like breath escaping from a wound. The city's emptiness screamed louder than any sound. A distant shriek tore through the air, thin and broken, like metal shearing under strain. I spun toward it, but the horizon swallowed the noise. Only silence remained. I forced my eyes ahead. The cracked streets stretched endlessly. I passed flickering billboards that glowed with unreadable symbols. Some flashed once before dying into static. Others pulsed, each beat matching the rhythm in my skull. I stumbled past a row of parked cars, their paint bubbled, warped into organic shapes. Some sagged like flesh. Some bent at unnatural angles, ribs exposed beneath twisted steel. I gagged again. I wanted to turn back, but the air wouldn't let me. It crawled over me like unseen fingers. I could feel it seeking cracks in my skin, sliding beneath clothing, burrowing toward my chest. I pressed my hands against my shirt. The fabric felt clammy. My arms twitched uncontrollably. Goosebumps rose in thick clusters. The hair on my arms stood like needles. I shivered. A soft rustle came from an alley to my right. I whipped my head toward it. The shadows pulsed. For a heartbeat, I saw them, figures pressed against the walls, watching. Tall shapes bent like thin branches, faceless. Their eyes glowed faint green. They didn't move, but I felt their presence. I backed away. The alley's darkness seemed to ripple like liquid. It whispered without sound. My breath hitched. I stumbled forward, eyes darting from window to window. More faces loomed in the darkened glass. Some distorted into smiles with too many teeth. Some stared with empty sockets. Some twisted into grotesque shapes that made my stomach churn. I swallowed bile. My legs quivered. The world bent again. The pavement rippled. The road stretched forward like a corridor, dissolving into mist. I pressed my palms into my thighs, forcing them steady. I whispered to myself, it's nothing, just hallucinations. But my voice wavered. My words bounced back strangely, as if the air warped them. The farther I walked, the stranger the city became. Shadows detached from walls and slid across sidewalks without moving their limbs. Streetlights pulsed brighter with each step, racing like hearts desperate to keep up. The sky above churned with unnatural color, purple bleeding into green, gold veins twisting across the black. A smell thick as iron filled the air. Rotting cables, scorched concrete, something sour and wet. My throat clenched. I gagged again, but still pressed on. I passed a park bench overturned, its metal legs bent inward like claws. A trash bin lay shattered, plastic fused into dark lumps. The entire city seemed to be rotting in slow motion, devouring itself. But there were no other bodies. No footsteps. No voices. Only silence and the thick, crawling pulse. I stopped at an intersection. For roads stretched outward like broken limbs. Dust swirled around me in spirals. The pulse grew stronger here. It pressed at my temples. I clutched my head. For a moment, I thought I saw movement ahead. A flicker of pale light near the edge of the horizon. I squinted. The city stretched on endlessly. But beyond the haze, beyond the ruined streets, shapes stirred. Or maybe it was only the pulsing distortion. I didn't know. I didn't care. All I knew was that I wasn't alone. Something lurked in the shadows. Something waited beyond the cracked streets. Something hungry. And it wasn't hiding anymore. I kept walking. There was nowhere else to go. The empty streets stretched before me like wounds without edges, broken and bleeding dust. I told myself to keep moving, to stay ahead of the pulse that crawled along the pavement, twisting like veins reaching for me. But it wasn't enough. I could feel it everywhere. Behind my eyes, under my skin, in my bones. It whispered without sound. It pressed against me in the spaces between steps. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, some hallucination from exhaustion and panic. But it didn't go away when I blinked. It didn't vanish when I rubbed my eyes. There, far beyond the cracked skyline, shapes rose against the horizon. Not one, many. Dark hulks hunched in the distance like mountains crawling forward. Their edges shimmered with a pale green glow that pulsed in rhythm with the beat inside my head. The shapes moved, or maybe the air around them breathed. It was hard to tell, but they were coming. The pulse in my chest slammed harder. My knees buckled. I forced them forward. My vision narrowed, tunnel-like. The edges of the world flickered like heat waves above asphalt. The streets stretched unnaturally long, curling toward those looming shapes. I stumbled past broken storefronts and shattered glass that crunched underfoot like brittle bone. Some windows stared back with empty, fractured eyes. Some faces melted, distorted by shadows, grotesque in their stillness. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat clenched around air, too thick to pass. I tried again, rasping through the metallic tang. Still nothing. The pulse hammered my temples. I pressed my fingers against them, but it burrowed deeper. My sight blurred. The horizon wavered. The shapes grew larger. I staggered toward them. The world swayed with each step. The cracks in the pavement stretched like wounds trying to open wider. I fell against a lamppost twisted like a broken spine. Its light flared. The metal groaned. For a breathless second, I thought it bent toward me like an arm reaching out. I pushed myself upright. "Not now," I whispered hoarsely. The air answered by thickening around me. I stumbled on. The shapes at the horizon resolved slightly. They weren't buildings. They weren't mountains. They were ships. Massive hulks gliding through the sky, edges alive with pulsing veins of light. Their forms warped the air around them, bending the night like heat waves above asphalt. Their tendrils trailed like fingers. Some brushed the clouds. Some reached downward, searching. I froze. A wave of dread hit me so fast I staggered backward. My heart raced. My skin crawled. The pulse in the air quickened, syncing with the rhythm in my skull until it felt like one thing. One living creature breathing through me. I spun around. Empty streets stretched behind me. Windows stared like hollow sockets. Shadows pressed at edges. No one moved. But I wasn't alone. Something watched. Something waited. I wanted to turn and flee, but my legs refused to obey. I forced myself forward. The tendrils in the distance pulsed brighter with each beat. They reached farther. The air seemed to lean toward me like a hand stretching from across a gulf of night. My breath hitched. For a second, I felt awe. The sight struck me like thunder. I was so small, so fragile, so alone. And yet, part of me wanted to sink into it. To let the tendrils wrap around me, pull me closer. The pulse whispered again. "Come, let us show you. You belong." I clutched my chest. My eyes watered. The sky twisted, stars swirling in spirals around the looming forms. The ground buckled underfoot. Dust lifted in small whirlwinds. The smell, metallic, rotten, sharp, filled my lungs and coated my tongue. I gagged but swallowed anyway. My skin broke out in goosebumps. The air itself crawled over me like living insects. I shook uncontrollably, but I kept moving toward the horizon. The ships grew larger with each staggered step. The pulsing veins of their hulls raced like heartbeats gone mad. For a fleeting second, I thought I could see faces within them. Eyes like suns, mouths stretched in silent howls, limbs folded at impossible angles. They weren't ships at all. They were living things, hungry, patient. They hovered, waiting for me. The pulse surged again. My vision tunneled. The world flickered. The edges of reality blurred until I couldn't tell where I ended and it began. I stumbled forward one last time before crumpling to the ground. I crawled on hands and knees, tears blurring my sight. The ships hung above the horizon like predators circling unseen prey. The whispers inside my skull grew louder. "You are ours. You will return. We are the darkness beneath." I pressed my fingers into the dirt until my nails broke the skin. But still I kept crawling. The city behind me faded into dust and shadows. The lights ahead pulsed brighter. The horizon twisted like a vortex, pulling me in. I didn't care anymore. I didn't want to. The pulse embraced me like an old friend. The tendrils reached closer with each beat. I whispered without sound, lips trembling. I'm coming. I don't remember standing up. I remember the ground beneath me buckling, folding like paper, but somehow I found my feet. I remember the tendrils pulsing at the horizon, racing toward me with a hunger I could feel in my marrow. I remember the air thick with something alive, something watching. But I stood. I forced my legs to lock. My chest heaved, lungs burning, throat raw with static. The pulse slammed into me like fists against bone. It pressed against my temples. It hissed into my ears. It wrapped itself around my neck like a collar tightening. I gritted my teeth. I fixed my eyes on the horizon. The ships loomed now, massive and malformed against the sky. Their hulls stretched like muscle, shimmering with green veins racing along metal skin. Each tendril extended, curling through air like fingers seeking purchase. They reached toward me. I stood my ground. I raised my chin. Defiant. I screamed. The sound tore from my throat, but it didn't leave me. It bounced back, warped, trapped inside my skull. Only silence answered. The tendrils pulsed brighter. The edges of the world bent in response, like the air itself leaned in to listen. The ships trembled. Their pulsing veins stretched toward me, slow and deliberate. I forced my lips open. Words spilled out, jagged fragments. I'm not afraid. But they sounded broken, hollow, ripped from some deeper place within me that didn't know language anymore. The pulse raced. The lights at the ship's edges flickered faster. The night sky twisted, stars spiraling inward toward the tendrils. I clutched at my chest. My fingers dug into flesh. I screamed again, but still nothing escaped. The silence deepened. It spread like ink flooding water. The tendrils reached further now, curling like fingers brushing my skin. Cold radiated from them without touching. My eyes bulged. My vision tunneled until the world narrowed to the pulsing shapes. The ground buckled. My knees trembled. I felt them start to give way, but I forced them straight. The pulse pressed harder. It crawled into my muscles, sliding along tendon and bone like living silk. It whispered again. We feel you. We see you. Come to us. The words echoed through my mind like the pounding of a distant drum. They synchronized with my heartbeat until the two became one. I clutched my head. My hands shook uncontrollably. The edges of the city warped like reflections in broken glass. The trees bent like skeletal arms reaching from the earth. The clouds twisted in spirals around the ships like smoke pulled into a vortex. The tendrils brushed my skin now. Not touching, but close enough. The air shivered with their presence. I shuddered. My breath hitched. My vision blurred. The pulse raged in my ears until it drowned out all thought. The world narrowed to the racing veins of light stretching toward me. For a brief moment, panic surged through me. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn away, but my legs locked. My eyes fixed. I couldn't move. I couldn't turn. I couldn't blink. All I could do was stand as the tendrils crawled across the air between us, inching closer with each pulse. I whispered, I'll fight you. The words slurred. The pulse laughed. You cannot. You will join us. The tendrils reached farther. They brushed the air inches from my face. My skin crawled. Every hair follicle screamed with static. My jaw spasmed. My eyes bulged. The world twisted around me. My sight rippled like water struck by a stone. The horizon stretched and warped until it felt like falling into it. I clutched at the ground. My nails tore dirt and dust. I screamed once more. But still nothing came. Only silence. The tendrils reached toward me again, slow and deliberate. They curled like fingers closing around my chest. They brushed my cheeks. They brushed my lips. They brushed my eyes. The pulse crashed through me like a wave. Everything snapped. My thoughts shattered. Words broke apart. Images fractured. I was screaming, but I couldn't hear it. I was breathing, but air wouldn't pass. I was standing, but my legs floated inches above the cracked asphalt. The ships hovered above me now. Their veins of light flared in unison. They reached down like a cage closing. I tried to speak, but my tongue lay heavy, unresponsive. My lips trembled. My mind spiraled. I saw my mother's face melt into another's. I saw Marissa's eyes flicker like dying stars. I saw the corridors of the bunker twist and fold like paper. The pulse roared in my skull until I could no longer separate memory from invasion. The tendrils curled around me, not touching but suffocating. I screamed again, but this time, even I couldn't hear it. The world narrowed to the pulsing veins of light, reaching closer, closer. I don't know when I fell. One moment I was standing. The next, I was sprawled on the cracked pavement, face pressed into dust and grit that tasted metallic on my tongue. The pulse, it didn't stop. Even lying there, even curled into myself like a broken animal, I could feel it crawling along my skin. It had become part of me. It breathed in rhythm with my heart. It pressed against my temples. It whispered without sound. I rolled onto my back. The sky above me twisted like a living wound. The ships still hovered at the horizon. Only now they were closer, closer than they'd ever been. Their edges glowed with veins of pulsing light, green and white and faintly violet. They hung like predators circling, patient. Their tendrils reached toward me without touching, fingers of static hungry for entry. The wind tugged at my hair like soft hands. I reached up and touched my face. The skin felt clammy. Cold patches of something slick crawled beneath my fingertips. I jerked back, but the pulse raced faster. I pressed my hands against the ground. Dust crumbled beneath my palms like dry bone. I sat up. My legs trembled. My muscles spasmed uncontrollably. I rubbed my eyes. The world didn't clear. The buildings nearby stretched and sagged like melting wax. Windows stared with hollow eyes. Shadows pressed in corners where nothing should be. I blinked again. The sky rippled like water struck by a stone. The ships warped the night around them. Each pulse sent waves of light radiating outward. My vision blurred at the edges. My name, what was it? I clutched at my head. Words dissolved like sand slipping through fingers. I whispered fragments. I'm somewhere. My lips moved, but sound didn't come. The pulse filled my ears, drowning my voice before it could form. I pressed my palm to my chest. My heart thundered. For a second, I thought I could feel it, the pulse, racing alongside it, sinking until I couldn't tell which beat belonged to me. I stumbled to my feet. The pavement buckled beneath me. My knees threatened to give way. Still, I took a step. The city stretched out before me. Vacant streets curled like rivers of dust. Broken lampposts leaned like skeletal fingers reaching skyward. Shadows clung to corners, unmoving, watching. A gust of wind carried distant screams, or maybe it was only the pulse laughing in my skull. I staggered forward. The buildings along the street flickered with static. Their outlines pulsed. Their walls stretched, twisted, like faces breathing beneath plaster. I passed a doorway half swallowed by rubble. Inside, nothing moved, but I felt eyes. I kept going. The pulse urged me on. It whispered from every crack in the pavement. It brushed my neck with invisible fingers. It slid across my shoulders like silk. I shook uncontrollably. My legs twitched. My skin crawled. Still I walked. I whispered my name again, but the air swallowed it whole. Only static replied. The ships at the horizon pulsed brighter with each step. The sky above them twisted like spirals of liquid light. The stars bled into one another. The horizon stretched endlessly. I couldn't tell how far away they were anymore. I felt drawn toward them. Part of me wanted to surrender. Part of me wanted to run. But both legs refused to obey. I walked anyway. The streets curved around me, folding in ways that made sense only to the pulse. I passed broken benches fused with dust. A car skeleton with limbs bent like claws. A billboard frozen mid-glare, symbols pulsing in silent warning. The smell of metal and rot thickened with each breath. My stomach turned. I gagged, but the pulse smoothed the nausea like an invisible hand. It whispered again, "You belong. We are with you. You are ours." I staggered toward the horizon. The tendrils stretched farther now, rippling through the air like veins feeding on the city. They didn't touch me, but they brushed my thoughts, my memories. Faces I didn't know flickered at the edges of my sight. A mother's lullaby twisted into static. A child's laughter warped into hollow cries. I clutched at my head. The world around me wavered. The ships hovered closer. Their pulsing veins stretched toward me like the arms of some ancient creature rising from the deep. I stopped. The pulse roared louder. It drowned everything else. I closed my eyes. For a moment, darkness swallowed the ships, the streets, the buildings. Inside the darkness, I felt them closer. Their fingers brushed the edge of my mind. Their whispers echoed. I wanted to scream, but still nothing came. I opened my eyes. The horizon burned brighter than before. The tendrils reached farther. The pulse surged through me. I fell forward onto the pavement once more. The sky above twisted again. The ships hovered, waiting. I lay there. Dust stuck to my cheeks. Static crackled in my ears. I pressed my hands against the ground. The pulse wrapped around my wrists like cold fingers. I whispered without sound. I. The words dissolved. The sky rippled once more. A new shape rose at the horizon. Brighter. Closer. It pulsed with green-white light. It stretched its tendrils toward me. I opened my eyes wide. The world tilted. The pulse roared. The ships waited. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I just stared as the new craft pulsed brighter than any before, like an eye about to open.